Let's drink some wine.
Morgan, thanks for joining.
Great to have you here. Or great to be here. You're having me.
You're the host. We could switch seats.
No,
honestly.
let's not do that.
We switched seats. Maybe we didn't. We were in our other room, and we had everything set up on another wall, and now I'm like trying to remember, was I always on the left or was I on the right? So hopefully it confuses.
You're living a new life.
Anybody that actually watches this, hopefully it confuses them.
You can just split screen it back the other direction.
That'd be great. Oh, that's a good idea.
Reverse the footage.
Yeah.
Just the power of editing.
We could shoot in front of a mirror and then only shoot the mirror. No, wait, hold on. Sorry, this is too much now.
Just fix it in post.
Yeah,
that's what the kids see these days.
Yeah. We just edit it, throw in a couple filters. You'll have you'll have frog eyes the next time you see yourself on camera.
I've been waiting for those my whole life.
Perfect. I love it.
It's visual effects.
That's funny.
Make me into Andy Serkis.
Well, I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
You and I crossed paths first when I was your sales rep at Angler, a wonderful restaurant on the Embarcadero, 1-star.
I like it.
Yeah. I know that you had been, you had worked within that group previously. But before that, we were just having a conversation. You were talking about Nell, and I realized that I probably don't know much else about your story, kind of your journey. So I'd love if you could kind of give us a overview of your path, where wine kind of became something that you decided that you wanted to pursue as a career. And
I often say this, is that there's everybody comes to the wine world as a second thing, professionally at least, right? Because there's no high school guidance counselor who's, what you should do is go get people drunk for a living. It just doesn't. Yeah. It just doesn't happen.
That's a good point.
And the way that the service industry is sort of looked at in America is a very, it's not looked at as a profession. It's looked at as an occupation.
Yeah.
It is not a calling, or should not be a calling for, young people, right? Because it's a nowhere, dead end, this, that, and the other thing. So I wouldn't say that I didn't have to sort of get over that, but I just loved restaurants so much that's kind of what happened. So I went to undergraduate at a college called Emerson in Boston, and I have a theater performance degree from there, as well as a couple minors in a few different things, one of which being marketing, which has actually been pretty useful in a couple of different ways. But I always knew that I was going to have to make a living, because I wasn't going to I was going to put a roof over my head as an actor in New York, right away at least. And so I was like, well, I have to figure out some way to do this. And I had always loved food and dining and all that stuff. And I got a job my junior year of college at this big, huge Italian restaurant in the North End of Boston, and got absolutely destroyed by this job. But there was this great guy there named Amadeo, who just sort of took some time to actually walk me through some of the wine stuff, right? And it was very clear that wine combined a lot of my interests, which is, say, a very wide set of things. It's history, geography, politics, religion, all of that stuff. And so it was that was kind of the kernel of it, but it didn't really turn into a profession until I moved to New York. I have a Screen Actors Guild card. I had management. I had a bunch of things that young actors would call successes, at least. Not maybe success, but I had some successes. And I really hated the process of it. I hated, auditioning. I hated just the grind of it and how mercurial it felt and how unmeritocratic it was. And I went through a really bad breakup, and I had been working in wine bars just to pay the bills, and sort of invested in that whole idea. And then when I was 25, I was like, okay, I got to get out of the city. I can't be here anymore. I got to go get my head straight. So I went and worked at Harvest in Eastern Washington in 2011 at a winery called Waters, which is still around, although in a fairly different format than it was back then, side by side with Gramercy Cellars.
Oh, cool.
And in New York, I had met Laura Manick, the Master Sommelier who owns Cork Buzz, and I came back and I was like, "Hey, I'd love to work for you to open Cork Buzz." And I had worked in wine bars at this point for 2 years on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and wanted to go work downtown. So I worked for her for 2 years, which was really a super big sort of crash course in management and getting my ass kicked. But I learned a ton during that time, but it was certainly a crucible. It was not necessarily the happiest time, but
Sure.
I learned a lot during that, and was sort of working my way through the CMS, and wine is the exact opposite of acting, right? Acting is everybody's trying to crawl over the dead body of the person underneath them on the ladder to get up to the next rung, whereas wine is very horizontal. It's all about sharing. And so the combination of that and just my life changes, I was like, okay, so I'm 25 and this is the only time in my life where I'm going to know relatively more than a lot of people my age about wine. So let's really invest in that. So I was at Cork Buzz for about 2 years. I passed my advanced from the CMS in 2012 on the second attempt. Got my ass kicked on the first one because I didn't know anything about service and I didn't really know how to taste wine. And then I worked for Charlie Palmer at Oriole, the second iteration of his flagship right on 42nd Street for the better part of 4 years because I wanted to work in fine dining. Continued to prepare for my MS, set that, and I'm a Seattle boy originally and always knew I wanted to move back here. But it took me like 3.5 years to find a job that was like over and up, right? I didn't want to move just to move. I liked my life in New York. I knew I was never coming back.
Didn't want to parallel. Yeah.
Right. I wanted to go do a new thing and sort of move across the country. And so I eventually connected with the people at the Saison Hospitality Group. And at that time, they had 3 Michelin stars and 23rd best restaurant in America, so on and so forth. And they were opening this new project. And I met with Mark Bright, who's definitely a legend in the San Francisco wine community. And we just had a conversation about, well, would you rather run Saison or run Angler? And I said, well, I think Angler is probably a little closer to my sort of heart and what I want to do. I mean, I love ultra fine dining, but at the same time, it's a hell of a lot of work.
Yeah.
So then I moved here and I ran that up until the pandemic, and then things got weird for everybody. And then I came back and I was there until just a couple of months ago. And just, after 5 years, I had to do something new. So I'm trying to figure out what that is right now. But,
exploring.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the story.
That's awesome.
And eventually passed my MS in 2018, right as I moved out here. So we opened Angler in, I think, October, and I passed my MS in the first week of September or something like that.
Woof.
So it was a lot all at once.
God, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you had mentioned as kind of getting into fine dining to continue to pursue your certifications. I feel like that's kind of like the path. I mean, do you feel like it's got to be easier, I assume, to get the education, taste the wines, be exposed to those wines, and also to get to the level of service that's required to pass something like even advanced?
So one of my mentors from New York is this guy named John Reagan, who runs all of the Union Square Hospitality Dannermeyer restaurants at this point now in terms of restaurants. And he was at 11 Madison Park through its sort of meteoric rise. And he likes to talk about certifications versus your career as cakes and frostings, right?
Okay.
So certifications are the frostings, the career is the cake, right? And people will eat a pretty good cake that doesn't have any frosting on it, but most of the time people don't want to eat a shit cake that has a bunch of frosting on it.
Right.
So I would say that for me, I passed the MS because I wanted to pass the MS, but the real thing I got out of it was the community, the friends I made, the things that I learned along the way in all of those early morning tasting groups. So if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. But I would say that most of the value of it is baked into the community around the exams and not necessarily passing the exams themselves. So, where did we start with this conversation?
It was a question of, do you think that working in fine dining has kind of necessary for
so
that.
it's not necessary, but the thing I will say about fine dining is, in fine dining, every decision is choreographed, right? You have a series of decisions that you make on a floor to create this incredible experience. If you don't work in ultra fine dining, you don't know what decisions you're leaving out of your process in a casual restaurant or in a more casual service. So I'd say that everybody should work fine dining, especially if your goal is to one day open a more casual spot, because you don't know what decisions you're not making until you've worked in these very maximalist environments in which every single part of a guest experience is choreographed and really smooth, right?
Yeah.
The demands of the room are so high. It's kind of like being you may in your heart and soul want to be a jazz pianist, but if you can't play every single arpeggio, if you don't know special things about chord voicings, if you can't play, Rachmaninoff piano concertos, then you're probably going to be a less good jazz musician in some ways.
Sure.
Right? So the technical prowess that those environments demand is what allows you to do all the other stuff well. So I wouldn't say it's 100% a necessity, but for me, it was very good to see what decisions I wasn't making, as well as what decisions I was making in casual settings. And I would say that that's its principal value. And then simply these days, just access to wines that you're never going to open anywhere else, which is just a reality of the way the money has gone in the wine world.
Yeah. 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 I think, I feel like, in my time in fine dining, I gained a lot. I learned a lot. I feel like it was incredibly valuable to me. But you're right. I mean, I feel like once I did it, I was able to decide, like, is this something that I want to do, or is this not something that I want to do? And I was able to say, like, that maximalist kind of style was not really for me, because...
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying there's necessarily value in it of itself.
I mean, there is in a way, right?
Just to tap into some current zeitgeist stuff. Like, I don't want to watch The Bear.
Right.
Because I spent too much time in fine dining. I lived that world.
Yeah, yeah.
The irony is the weird glamorization of it inside of the popular media, but that's totally departed from the reality of what those spaces are like, which they are not really happy places. They are not places of joy. They're very regimented. They're very militaristic. They do have some of that Bourdainian pirate ship energy, but mostly at the bar at 2 a.m. afterwards.
Yeah.
But they are very prescriptive environments that require discipline, and if you don't have that, you're going to bounce off them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's beholden on your employers to understand who you're hiring, right? I went out for a job interview at 11 Maslin Park, and it wouldn't, when I was maybe 26 or 27, and I don't know, I didn't get the job, so I don't know whether or not I would have done well in that environment, but my instincts now tell me I wouldn't have. It took some time for me to work in between intermediary spots to understand what a room like that expects. And certainly working the sort of 6 to 9 months that I did at Saison, and I was one of the very few people in the company who knew both the Angler service and the Saison service, so I would often go work that service. I would much rather on a day-over-day basis work in a restaurant like Angler, but it's very cool when you know how to drive a Ferrari fast, drive your Ferrari fast every once in a while. But on a day-over-day basis, it's incredibly demanding on your personal life, and certainly the value of your time, while you do make a fair amount of money inside of it, the value of your time is very low.
Yeah.
Right? I would say that on an hourly basis, I never made, not never, but made less money in some ways at a restaurant like any of the fine dining restaurants I worked in, because you're expected to be there for so long.
Yeah. The number of hours to the dollars made is significantly different.
The dollars made are pretty good, but when you really start to do the math, I won't name the restaurant, but there was, in my time in New York, there was a restaurant where they would have doubles. The doubles, if you were a double sommelier, you would show up at about somewhere between 9:45 and 10:15. You would work a lunch service. But because it was a 3-star, top 50 world's best restaurant at the time that was very ambitious, you would work through lunch, but they would have 2 seatings. So you might get a 1:30 and you might not get off the floor until 4.
Right.
Pre-shift for dinners at 5:15.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Then you have dinner. And if you're the one who gets stuck with the Russian oligarch seating or the Saudi Arabian oil money seating, and they sit down at 11, because that exists in not San Francisco.
Yeah.
Well, really, it exists in New York in particular.
Yeah.
But it's a 3.5-hour meal. So your day was 9 a.m.
Yeah.
to 2:33 in the morning.
Yep.
With like a half an hour lunch break.
Yeah.
But like, tell me about the glamour of fine dining, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, it's a world that I have a ton of respect for and really love going to those restaurants for occasions and really enjoyed my time inside of that space, but it's not rational or reasonable.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen a little bit of pushback around that in terms of, the realities of the post-pandemic world.
Yeah. I mean, I think like to me, the reason that I kind of gravitated towards a little bit more of a casual setting is because, my dad was a plumber and my mom was a salesperson. She sold foam for chairs and she sold candy in gas stations for a while with Sather's Candy Company, right? Like we were middle class at best.
But again, that exactly proves the fact that no one tells you to go into wine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's the most beautiful thing about this business is that everybody comes from something else.
Yeah.
Nobody shows up in the first place, so I think it makes it much easier for all of us to be a little more gentle with everybody because we know this wasn't. We came to this. We chose this. We didn't go get an MBA and then start climbing a corporate ladder and then doing these things.
Or it's not like a sport that you just pick up and you're just the fucking best at in high school and you're the alpha, Yeah.
Right. It's whatever side of the business you work on, you came to it after trying some other things. And I think that makes for a lot of grace interpersonally, or should, right? Certainly I've enjoyed a lot of it in my career because I've made some silly decisions and done some dumb stuff. Dumb, dangerous, but it wasn't a hard lesson to learn, but when I stepped out of my job at Cork Buzz after 2.5 years there, I met with a very prominent sommelier at the time in New York, and I was like, well, what would you recommend I do next? And it was like, first thing, you don't ever leave a job without having a plan of what's coming next, right?
Oops.
Right. It worked out fine.
Yeah.
I did give myself about a $30,000 raise to go work the next job.
That's great.
Which worked out okay, but it did take me like 3.5-4 months to find it, and by the end it was sort of like, well, some pennies rattling around in the bottom of my bank account. Whereas if I had just stayed in the job I had and
shopped around,
while I was doing that, then it would have done it. But anyway,
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear how you kind of like bounce back and forth. I mean, one of my biggest regrets so far, I have plenty, but one of the ones that I think about a lot is...
In the wine world?
One of the ones I think about a lot is that I haven't been to New York yet. I have a close friend that got interested in wine during my time knowing him and has moved to New York and is sending me all these cool pictures of all these cool wines. And it's interesting to see kind of where the city's at right now. They're all drinking cool, like, Jura wines, and they're drinking, a lot of Loire wines, and there's, like, a bunch of, like, cool, interesting things, and then I come here and, like, the restaurants are, like, Napa Cab, Bordeaux.
Well, don't believe what Instagram tells you.
I guess
but as somebody who's now lived in San Francisco for March of 18, so I guess I'm north of 6 years now, and was in New York for nearly a decade.
Yep.
The biggest difference is that, like, San Francisco it's just 7 Mile Square is not that big.
Yeah, it's not.
Right, and we're rabidly against density.
Yeah.
So it's never going to be big.
Nope.
At the end of the day, we're 600,000 people on a Don't get me around the fact that we call not a peninsula the peninsula.
Yeah, I've always loved that.
Yeah, it never made any sense to me. But at the end of the day, we have an incredible affluence in the Bay Area, but we don't have people. Like New York, Brooklyn is the third largest city in America if it's not attached to the rest of that. But the value of New York, I mean, if I had my druthers in the authoritarian dictatorship of Morgan Harris, right? Everybody just does a turn of service in New York in their middle 20s.
Sure.
Because I think we would be a far more tolerant, understanding nation if that was the case. Because New York is, the whole world came to one spot and said, hey, let's just try to get along.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the people you see on the train every morning, the neighborhoods you live in, the level of diversity around that is just simply not present in the Bay Area. There was a very funny review, which is very close to home, because my partner's of Korean descent now, but basically they were like, well, Angler was made for the Bay Area duopoly of Asians and white people, right? And the wine business and in particular, high-end restaurants can very much feel like that. A lot of the time, even though the reality underneath it is more complicated. But anyway, we're talking about New York and the positive here. It's just there's 8.5 million people. Like you can't get around that. And we're about, I think, 3.5 here in the Bay Area if you include north of the bridge and out to Danville and down to just north of San Jose and all that stuff. And there's tremendous wealth, which drives certain sets of wine sales, but the wealthy are drinking less wine and they're drinking more expensive wine. So what I've really seen in the last 5 to 10 years is simply the incredibly upward drift of a few set of very selected wines that the ultra wealthy believe are a thing that they should drink. And then the middle of the market has gotten a little hollowed out. You've certainly seen that in restaurants, right? Like the people who cater restaurants who cater to the very wealthy are doing pretty well. Right? And restaurants on the bottom end of things are doing pretty well. So like the Adobe Palaces of the world and the Spruces of the world are both doing rather well. But what we lost in San Francisco in the last, certainly post-pandemic, is kind of the whole middle of the market, right? Because people aren't going out as much. A lot of those layoffs at places like Google and whatnot were kind of a lot of those middle level positions. People in their middle 20s to early middle 30s who made $175,000 $250,000 a year, who had a bunch of disposable income, right? Like middle level, senior engineering managers and things like that. And that's really curtailed the restaurant space in some ways. And wine getting more expensive. And so simply, like we talked about this before the interview, but just interest rates, right? Wine lists like Angler's simply just doesn't make sense, right? When you have $900,000 tied up in inventory, it could be making, like I can make 5.5% in just a high yield savings account. So if you have $900,000 to throw around, it's sitting around in wine inventory just does not make any sense. Right. So or if it does, it's really a commitment, right? But then it's got to be attached to a restaurant that can command those price points. And hence we get into this sort of pickle of the sort of haves and the have-nots. And again, I love the Bay Area for its diversity and all of the great stuff, but the sort of middle level wine restaurants have been kind of hollowed out a little. There are exceptions that sort of prove the rule. Like I love Kitchen Istanbul, but that's really a decision that Emra and his team have made to like invest all this money inside of the wine program. And that's really fundamentally what it comes down to in restaurants. Wine is it's a capital commitment and it's a decision that the restaurant is making, right? Saying, hey, we're going to sink 70 or 80 or 100 or $120,000 into this because we believe that this is something that makes our food better and makes us for a better restaurant.
Right. Yeah. Makes us a bit more of a destination or would drive people to us.
Right. Or just simply something that we believe is part and parcel with the vision of the restaurant that we have.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it's also, when we're talking about kind of like the amount of money invested in a wine program, it also like begs the question of like the depreciation value that happens with some of the wines, right? It's like,
well, but restaurants aren't, it doesn't matter. Restaurants are, It's the great irony of this is most of the people who invest in restaurants, they're in many ways sort of diversifying their assets, right? So if you told someone, hey, I got this great idea for you, right? We're going to have this really high operation cost business, right? You need a lot of staff. The staff are going to cost money. We've got a bunch of perishable goods inside of it as well. And then if we kill it, we're going to make 6 to 12%.
10%, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If that was a Silicon Valley pitch, right, it would go over like Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
One of my favorite bands, but that's literally why they're called that, is because somebody thought that their whole idea for a band would go over like a Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
So they're not sound businesses, right? But because many people would like to be the sort of people who own restaurants, there's a lot of availability of capital that happens regularly. So that's the dichotomy. Like I will likely be in restaurants again soon, but I mean, I've been in restaurants for 16, 17 years. Even if I had the capital, I would never want to open one.
Fuck no. Yeah. When I was a kid, I thought I did. When I was 18, 19, I was like, I want to own a restaurant one day.
There's one concept that I have for a restaurant, but it's not really, it's two people who serve grilled cheese sandwiches and whiskey and beer.
Yeah.
Right. That's it.
Sounds great.
It sounds great.
Low cost of sale.
Listen, well, if anybody wants me to pitch them on this idea, we had this place in Brooklyn in New York that me and my roommate would go to all the time. It was called Norman's Kill, but we call it grilled cheese whiskey because literally it was just a bartender and this like totally chingone Mexican guy or Salvadorian guy who would make grilled cheese sandwiches, and they had like pickles, and they put them on paper plates, and no dishwashers, right? And they would serve cocktails and beer, but no juices.
Yeah.
So
great.
Just a huge selection of whiskey and brown liquor, because you just put that in a cup and you make money.
There you go.
And draft beer, which you make a ton of margin off of. And they just hang out from 6 until 2 in the morning. And that's the only grilled cheese whiskey is the only business that I want to open.
Yeah. I've always said a dive bar.
I say this as a wine person.
Right. Yeah. I've always thought the same thing as like people will go, do you want to open a restaurant? No. Would you want to open a wine bar? Not really. Right. I mean, if somebody else is going to pay for it, maybe. But all I want is just like a little hole in the wall dive bar.
Right.
That I can just pour draft beer or Jack and Coke and make my margins on. I mean, I always like to say that when I worked at Landry's, one of my favorite stories is the asshole tax. So I worked at Landry's.
Gosh golly, what would you be talking about?
I worked at Landry's, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, every week we would do inventory and we would do an extensive review of your inventory, and you'd look for any variances, and if you were off one beer, you had to explain it, and you'd go like. They'd set up this call.
Yeah, they had the weekly inventories.
Yeah, they'd set up this call.
Which is insane.
It's nuts. They'd set up a call. It was 8 hours, and you would sit there until they called you, and they'd say, you're missing this, your point's too high on this. You're missing 0.05% of a bottle of Grey Goose, or 0.05 of a bottle of Grey Goose. Figure it out. What's happening? Somebody's overpouring. Do your pour test. But I was looking through and I was looking at the cost of sales one time, and I'm like, we should probably charge more for a couple of these things. This is in Galveston, Texas. It's not a major city by any means. So like the idea of having to charge more for something, I was always like, we're going to get so much pushback. And I was looking at it one day and I go like, why the fuck do we charge so much for Jack Daniels? So I sent this big email out to corporate, and I go like,
no, I can tell you exactly why.
I go like, why are we charging? We charge 12 for Grey Goose, and we charge 14 for Jack Daniels for, an ounce and a half as a shot there. And, like, can we drop the price on Jack and raise the price on Grey Goose? And they said, no. That was the whole response. And so
why did you just raise the price on Grey Goose?
Well, which is what we did. And it was 16, right? So
there you go. That's your answer.
That's it. So the next time I went up there, I go like, well, look, like this is our percentage. Like, we're at a 12% cost of sale on a shot of Jack. And they go like, yeah. That's the asshole tax. Somebody who just wants to come in and just wants to drink Jack and Coke, they'll pay for Jack and Coke. And that's
this is one of the things that drives me nuts about the whole conversation around restaurants right now, which is to say that what we charge people for is not what they're actually getting.
right. This is something we deal with in wine all the time.
We have to charge you for booze because we can't charge you for the silverware and the lighting and the dishwasher and all of the other
air
stuff.
conditioning and
So, but because we're charging for Jack or whatever it is, there becomes this nominal idea of what something should or shouldn't cost. Sure. And this cuts in a bunch of different ways. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the most infuriating things about restaurants. So we'll build it back into wine, but people complain about 3 times markups on wine all the time. Mm-hmm. And those same people are happy to sit down for $19, $21 like pasta red sauce,
cheeseburger,
and $16 vodka sodas, and $9 pints of 100%. Miller Lite when they go to the ballpark, right? Like, or whatever it is. Like, but scenarios where they are clearly working off of margin around it because what they're paying for is not really what they're being sold.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing. So on wine lists, right? One of the things I think that young wine buyers often don't understand is you cannot buy wines that you cannot sell.
Right.
That's the number one rule.
Yep.
I don't care how you sell it, but when you thinking of cost as monolithic is kind of silly, right? You can rob Peter to pay Paul all over the place, which is something that I definitely would do at Angler. But understanding that people are often buying a variety and a price point, and they're not buying a wine. They're buying Pinot Noir at $120. So if you know you're going to sell a bunch of Pinot Noir at $120, then it behooves you to make sure that that price point of that wine is your highest margin generator.
Yep.
Right? So I'll give you an example of how this winds up playing out. So I believe that if something sells too quickly, it means it's too cheap. And if something sells too slowly, it means it's too expensive. Sure. So when we started at Angler, Sancerre was $20 a glass, right? Because it's the premium Sauvignon Blanc pour and so on and so forth. It is now functionally, there's been some price point increases in Sancerre cost on our end, but it's now at $27 a glass, and velocity has not slowed down at all.
No.
So that is to say, but, and a lot, normies who hear that are like, margin and stuff.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of wines on the wine list that you've never heard of that you might like that are being subsidized by that pour because our overall beverage cost has not changed.
Right.
We still, make about, something like $3.50 for every one that we spend.
Yeah.
Kitchens make about $3 for every one they spend.
Yeah.
Somehow people don't have a problem for this when you spend like $19 on a baked potato and $15 on creamed spinach, but then your steak is
$30 on a pizza,
right, or whatever. Yeah. But it sort of makes me wish we could just sell tickets to restaurants.
Yeah.
Right? Like to the movies.
Yeah.
It would never work actually because we need to price this. So that's what it comes down to at the end of the day is that the real business case for having a big wine list is price discrimination against a clientele. So you come into a restaurant, I come into a restaurant, Bill Gates comes into a restaurant, we're all ordering, the $80 strip steak, right? Really beautiful, this, that, and the other thing. Maybe Bill orders the Wagyu, right? Maybe you order the black truffle supplement that gets shaved on top of it. There's a couple of things the kitchen do to price discriminate against a clientele. So price discrimination, the idea is that all of us don't have the equal amount of dollars in our pocket, but we would like to figure out how to get, especially for businesses like restaurants that only make 6% when they're lucky, they want bigger top end revenue figures.
Yeah.
So you need to have ways to price discriminate against a clientele. And what wine allows you to do, wine is one of the few ways that restaurants can consistently do that. And so if there's some real business case to say, hey, we'd like to invest in a wine list, it's really that you need something to sell people. Because if you don't have a $1,500 bottle of wine, you know how many $1,500 bottles of wine you sell? Zero.
Yep.
Right? So you have to have that wine around, but it's about how you distribute those inventory dollars. I've consulted on a lot of wine lists, and it's about having that one bottle of it. It's not about, it's about signaling to your clientele that they could spend money here if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And if you don't sell it for the entire time you're open, well, then my bad, right? But you can just keep moving the price down. Eventually, you'll be able to turn it back into money.
You pulled a cork and you made 300 instead of 750.
Right. But then you've made the money, right?
Yeah.
And you've turned it back into cash again.
Yeah.
It's an asset that you can turn back into cash.
Yep.
So if you really feel like you have too much money tied up in inventory, you can just liquidate it at some point.
Yeah.
Like it's not hard to turn it back into money. So all these things are true. And yet, wine is too expensive in restaurants, this, that, and the other thing. So I don't know where we actually wind up. People like going to restaurants, but people don't want to pay for restaurants. So I don't know where the real truth is between all these things, but I think everything that we've talked about so far is all very true of the industry right now. And everybody's kind of playing chicken around how to make that work. And that's what's really hard about restaurants at the moment, to say nothing of the fact that everybody is sort of clutching their purse strings until after the presidential election, which is also an issue.
Election years are always challenging.
Right. But this one in particular, because I think a lot of whichever side of the political spectrum you're on, it's very clear that there's going to be some sort of bonanza in one direction or the other, whether or not it's going to be green energy or it's going to be coal.
Yeah.
The rich want to have piles of money right now to invest back in things that are going to make them money. And so everybody's sort of sitting and biding their time, around those things. So that sort of includes restaurants and all that. I don't know to what degree. What do you think about millennials not drinking, or zillennials, right? I think it's more that they don't have any money, and wine is seen as sort of part of an intimidating old guard, and there's not a lot of ways for them to get into it. But I don't, and like weed's obviously a competing factor. But I guess what's your take on that? As maybe somebody who's a little closer. I'm an 85 baby, so
90.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you're still you're closer to that direction, but not too far.
I would say, to me, it's kind of like right now what we're in the eye of like a perfect storm. Maybe not even in the eye of it, because it's not still. But I think there's a lot of contributing factors. And one of the ones I talk about a lot is like, I think people built really bad relationships with alcohol during the pandemic. And I think that they were drunk as fuck every day, all day, and they were depressed. And then they gave up drinking and they started feeling good. And they go like, why would I ever drink again? Not issue one, but maybe contributing factor one. And I think, the old guard thing has always been an issue with wine. The intimidation factor or the snobbery of wine has always been an issue. And I feel like, it's one of the main impetus that we started the podcast was to kind of like demystify wine, make wine feel more approachable, like make wine like less intimidating, right? Because at the end of the day, like we're just representing the wine because these fucking farmers work their ass off to make it. You know what I mean? So like it's
but
funny
I think that reality, honestly, that's the weird, the story that's never told, right? 'Cause there's all this slick marketing, and it's like, I like beer just fine. I like spirits just fine. Spirits in particular are not part of a thousands of year old agricultural tradition. They're not a cultural object, right? Like they have been growing wine in Italy as a foodstuff for the last 2,500 years, at least, right?
And let's not even go further east.
Part of their food culture. So in Europe, wine is a condiment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I understand that it has alcohol, and alcohol is not, but plenty of things aren't. Like what is even good for you anyway? Like these people want to live forever.
The sunlight fucking kills you. You know what I mean? Like you go outside, you're dying. That's solar radiation.
And hell, like we may all die in the great nanobot war of 2045, right? We're going to be liquefied into pulp. Or
you're giving us 20 years, right? And that's
who knows? Yeah. But you can't take it with you, I guess is my point. But it's interesting to see these sort of generational zeitkeists collide. I think to some degree, and I'm sure you encounter this with the content you make, but there's also no visual story.
Yeah.
Right? It's a white thing, a pink thing, a red thing in a glass. It's a winery. Once you've seen one, you kind of seen all of them.
Yep. It's grapes on a vine.
Once you've seen one of those, you kind of seen all of those. Yeah. So insofar as it is an intellectual and hedonistic pleasure, you have to actually contact it, right? There's no way to perform wine outside of all the luxury branding nonsense, but of course that doesn't overlap with our world at all, because there are very, very, very few things that have large luxury branding budgets that also have integrity, right? Like it's not a wide overlap. I mean, we get sold that story a lot, but it's like Cristal, right?
Yeah.
For example,
Yeah.
like John Baptiste Lecaon is awesome, and they farm a ton of the land organically and biodynamically, and there's a lot that goes into that bottle that's good for the planet. And they have a huge marketing budget, and it's
Certainly.
luxury champagne and so on and so forth. But most of the things that are being marketed in that space are not that, right? But ostensibly, I feel like wine is the perfect product for millennials and zillennials, right? It's authentic. It's deeply rooted in culture. Like, we're obsessed with that as an idea. I think that's maybe the irony of both of our generations, is that we're obsessed with the authentic, but then we live our whole lives in this performative space.
Yeah.
Right? Where everybody is, I had a slightly older friend of mine say to me, "Don't believe everything you see on Instagram." Right? And that's probably true.
Yeah.
But I think we're very accustomed and acculturated to it now. But I don't know. I would be sad if restaurants went away, but after 15, 16, 17 years in this business, I'm not exactly hopeful about them at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that just stuff has to change, and you're right. I mean, like the people that are at the top and the restaurants that are at the top are doing as fine as they've ever been doing, right? Like, maybe not as fine as they've ever been, but they're still doing well. I think another thing that I'm hoping is really kind of like the maybe we're in this cocoon right now, but I'm hoping that this natural wine movement that's been happening, probably everybody that listens to this is fucking tired of hearing me talk about it, because I talk about the natural wine thing every time and every episode, basically, because it's important. I'm hoping that this is really kind of like the metamorphosis that will help us attract the younger generation, right? Because they are interested in like authenticity. They're interested in, I buy organic fruit. I go to the farmer's market. I support this farm. I support this. I want to know everything about what I'm into, And so like part of that is wine is exactly that. Wine is almost too much of that. If anything, you can get bogged down, sitting and talking about the story of every single fucking winery ever. Whereas you can talk about Scotch it's
been lampooned in public culture to very strong effect by, things like secession and all of that.
Yeah.
No, there's certainly a harmonic wavelength there, but generationally between the product, the reality of the product, and the people who would ostensibly be consuming it. But the question is, how are we telling people that story, and where are we telling them that story? I think is what it comes down to. And that's maybe a question for somebody who works as a sommelier in Oakland.
Yeah.
Right. But there's just not a lot of young poor people who live in San Francisco.
Yeah.
There are in New York, right?
Yeah.
There are definitely a lot of young poor people in New York.
Yeah.
And I don't say that in a derogatory way, because I was a young poor person in New York. And there's definitely some different other sort of energies around all that stuff. So I love it. I don't know what certainly having wine that's farmed in a responsible way is more important than wine that is aesthetically correct. But for me, the hardest part about talking to the people on the deep end of the pool in that regard is it's almost like talking through this funhouse mirror, where their whole value set is so different than mine around what I feel like we agree on the farming 100%, but then like what winds up going in the bottle, either
what
way,
comes out of the bottle,
right, or what comes out of the bottle, I guess would be more accurate. It's very, it's very fraught, right?
Yep.
It's very difficult to have those conversations in a relaxed way, because I get pinned down as Gen Z wine boomer, or elder millennial wine boomer,
Sure,
right, around these things, when in reality, I mean, there's plenty of wines that I would assign on the natural spectrum.
Yeah.
That like, I like natural wine. I'm not sure I like natty wine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you like Jean-Francois Gannevat's wines,
Foillard, you know?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people inside of that space, and even things that are further out along that spectrum, I can get down with. But we all have our tolerances for volatility and Brettanomyces, and the degree to which the support of wine or obscure it. And the hardest thing for me, at least generationally, has just been talking to people under let's say the age of 27 or so, is the ability to have a conversation around the realities of a wine. And, you're talking to someone who poured like Jeremy Castana's wines and all the old Selection Massal book and, Belluard in his like early 20s at this like hip downtown. But like this has been part and parcel with my world for a long time. So I don't know. I don't know what the real answer is, but there's a lot of finger pointing.
Yeah.
Oddly, right? Like it bears resemblance to a religion. There's this great book called A History of God, which talks about how the faiths of the book were the first exclusionary religions that basically said that, like, well, I am the chosen person and you are not the chosen person. And it feels very like that, having conversations with them sometimes around this, that, the other thing, of the people who are really, adherents of that particular world. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that, like, I'm hoping,
I get it. You don't.
I'm hoping that it's like that it's the gateway. Right. If it can get the non-drinkers into wine because they can decide, well, if I'm going to get into something, I want to get into something that I believe in. And then they can learn from that and say, you start drinking natty wines, but then they start getting exposed to things like Foillard or Gannevat that they can,
But I feel like sometimes the flaws become a bit of a shibboleth for the green drinker, in that side of that space.
Yeah. You're not wrong.
I really like this thing and the irony is that it's exactly like the other side of the mirror. One time I had really oaky Chardonnay and I liked it, so therefore I like all really oaky Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Is the same thing as saying is one time I had really volatile
I had kombucha,
Sauvignon from the Jura that was also oxidized, and therefore I like all wines that are both volatile and oxidized.
Yeah.
And then the real truth is somewhere in between those two, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying we should really point any fingers, but all of it is to say that just a little more focus on literacy and curiosity and just sort of simply
open-mindedness,
reading the wine as it is and saying, well, I like this thing or don't like this thing. I don't want to ever fault anybody's taste.
Yeah.
And I say that as, like, I don't fault the person who likes Caymus and Meiomi and, any of those really richly chemical manipulated wines, right?
Yeah.
Like, if that's the thing you like, that's the thing you like today. You may not always like that thing. And, this same way, there are plenty of things on the other end of the spectrum that are, really, like, unfathomably, like, Gabriel Bini's wines, right? Like, a $300 bottle of orange Zabibo from Pantelleria.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how did you arrive at this figure?
Why?
Right?
Yeah.
Like where did we get that you're making a wine that's like 12 times more expensive than anything else that's made on the
in
island?
its category. Yeah.
Right. So
it's funny.
And yeah, I don't, the answer is somewhere between those two things, but I'm highly conscious of the idea of value, right? And of making sure that everybody works hard for their money and making sure that what you put in somebody's cup is a good wine for them. Right. And I think that's the real work of the sommelier, right? Is figuring out, well, what experience do you want to have tonight? Do you want to be completely unchallenged by me and just drink something that's in your comfort zone at the price point you want to have? Or do you want to go on an adventure?
Yeah.
And try something new? And I don't care what side of that spectrum, being values agnostic about the experience that your guest wants to have, and setting those binaries up in a very clear way is super important. And then just also cutting to the chase very quickly about what it is they like to drink, right? Is super important. You know, what do you want to drink? Do you want to drink something like that or something different?
Yeah.
Or something like that that's different, right? Because at the end of the day, you're selling wine, but you're really giving an experience.
You're managing the experience. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the experience is all that matters.
Yeah.
To the restaurant sommelier.
Yeah.
Right. We can talk about, I just say that I've always sort of schizophrenically worn these two hats, which are, I live my life in two ways, right? There's Morgan, the hospitality professional, and then there's Morgan, the wine lover.
Yeah.
And those two things don't always necessarily cross.
Well, it's nice that you're able to kind of switch.
Well, but you do have to, sometimes you got to understand which
bit of a dance.
Which hat you're wearing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I would say that as my career went on, I think I started out very much like my passion should be your passion too. And as I've become older and older, it's become much more value agnostic around, I'm not going to serve anybody poison, but at the same time, if you generally drink Mayomi and, Camus and Rombauer because that's what you like, then I need to make sure that on my wine list, I have some sort of olive branch for you.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Because we're in the hospitality business. We're here to take care of people when it is maybe inconvenient or uncomfortable to take care of them. That's literally what hospitality is.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And what I see on the other end of the spectrum from young people writing these mostly natural wine lists is often that it's scorched earth.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
There is no.
Yeah, it's my fucking way or the highway.
So you're saying for the Rombauer drinker, you couldn't find. It doesn't need to be chemical, but you're telling me you couldn't find some really fatty, round, creamy Roussanne from somewhere,
Right? Yeah, yeah.
right?
Exactly.
That would have made them happy,
or one of these
from the Ardèche
field
right?
blends that you're finding, or
right?
yeah.
Or that. Because like I think about things the other way around in a relatively classical wine list. How do I find things that are, what I would consider to be natural wines that aren't necessarily natty, on the other side of things. So I think that's something that generationally was lost a bit in the pandemic as well, was the idea that we're hospitality professionals, not just people who happen to purchase wines for restaurants.
Yeah.
Right. That we are really just stewards of the money that our businesses have given us.
Right.
And that we cannot buy things we cannot sell, and that we cannot buy things that are not going to make our guests happy, or at least one of our guests happy.
One of them. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I love this conversation because thank you, and please make sure that you
tasty.
get a little. Yeah,
I'm
glad you like it. That's the whole point. Yeah, I think last night we had an interview with David Kolvek. He's at Sons and Daughters, and I like this conversation because it kind of addresses the role of somm or wine director or wine steward or whatever role you have at the macro scale, and that is that you're not just responsible for buying wine. You're not just responsible for making sure that the wine sells. You're responsible for the financial factor of the business. Like your job is to be responsible for this department, and I think that that's maybe something that people don't often think of. Like even when you go to a place and the wine list isn't huge and impressive, you have to realize that they don't just have an extra $50K to dump into their list.
Well, and also that's almost the best, right? The irony of my career is that I've worked with these like very maximalist American wine lists, 15, 17, 2,500, 3,000 references with all the best stuff from all over the world. And I mean that, everything from Hatzidakis Nectari to, DRC, RC to, Genevat Vin de Montpere to, Catena, Adriana, Whitestone, White Bones, right? Like that was the imperative of the last wine list I ran. And I think at the end of the day, every restaurant is a puzzle of need. And if you as a wine manager, somebody who's buying wine, is not thinking about what problem am I helping the restaurant to solve, right? So most clear-cut one would be Oriole, Times Square, The place is a barn, right? It's 100 seats in a bistro. It's a almost 60 seat Michelin 1-starred space with a big PDR. So we would do sometimes before like 8 o'clock, we would do 275 covers.
Woof.
Right? Like during restaurant week, that was when I got. But usually pre-theater, we would do at least 175, something like that. But then post-theater, we would sometimes do like under 30.
Yeah.
Because it was Times Square between 6th and 7th. So then it became beholden to me that if we're going to keep the kitchen staff around, then my job needs to be post 8 o'clock. I use the wine list to bring more people in, or not even the wine list, all the resources we have.
Sure.
So offering free corkage to collectors, because who gives a shit? I have to be there.
Yeah.
Right. If they're going to come and have a menu, that's more revenue.
They're eating. Yeah.
Right. Maybe they'll order a bottle of champagne beforehand, but I'm there already. The labor's there already. Who gives a shit whether or not they pay corkage or not?
That's a great point. Yep.
Right. But they're a butt in a seat.
Yep.
They're used to the space.
Yep.
Nick Kokonis gives this great. I don't know if you know who Nick is, but so Nick is chef's partner at what's that famous restaurant in Chicago? Alinea.
Yeah.
He also created Talk.
Okay.
But he created Talk as a Talk as a byproduct of their experiences at Alinea.
Okay.
So there's this thing that Will Gardera hosts called the Welcome Conference, and he's hosted it for about 10 years now. He's the former GM of 11 Madison through its whole meteoric rise, and is now consulting on the current season of The Bear and so on and so forth. But basically, Nick said that the traditional metrics around restaurants are all wrong, right? That the real figure that we should be looking at is what he calls dollars per seat minute, which is to say, how much money is a table making for the amount of time there's a butt in that seat, right? So dollars per seat minute. Your dollars per seat minute at a table that's empty is fucking zero.
Nothing.
Right? So whatever way you cut it. So that was the problem that I felt beholden to use the wine list to solve, right?
Sure.
Because the wine list is a luxury. People are definitely going to come to eat. They're not necessarily going to come just to drink wine. That's very different than the problem of a place like Saison, which on a Friday or Saturday is doing 55 or 60 covers, right? Is fully set out for 2 turns. There's no wiggle room. There's no room to put anybody at the bar.
Yeah.
So then what problem does the wine list need to solve? Well, then they need to solve for extracting maximum cash out of the people who are there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? How can we increase dollars per seat minute on each of those if we're to look at it in a very dead end or capitalistic way?
Sure, right. Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the only metric. And you have to do that in a way that makes sure that the restaurant is then full again next Saturday.
Yeah.
And next Thursday and next Monday and whatever other day of the week you're going to have. But understanding each restaurant as its own individual puzzle of need rather than this prescriptive set of rules, and realizing that as a beverage director, you're really trying to use your resources to solve whatever the problem is. So the first question that you should ask in any job interview is, well, what are you guys hoping to do at the restaurant right now? Like, what do you think you need to fix?
Yeah.
And that wasn't a perspective that anybody necessarily passed to me, but that was sort of a synthesis out of a lot of very smart people talking about, like Nick Kokonis, all the beverage managers who told me, people like Laura, both Williamson, who's an MS, and Manic, telling me, like, you just can't buy wines you can't sell, right? And I think that is a thing that a lot of, not like all people who manage beverage miss, right? That your job is to make the business better.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily always mean the same thing for every business.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, when I started at Ozumo, I mean, one of the first things that I did was I changed the way that the cocktail program was ran. I mean, they cared. They loved what they did. They had a lot of passion. But, the restaurant expanded greatly after the pandemic because we had the front patio and the back patio.
Yeah.
And, I think there was 26 tables that were added on the Embarcadero, and there was 22 tables added on Stewart Street. So we effectively doubled our seating with the same size kitchen and the same size bar.
Right.
And we were making every cocktail to order. There was no batching being done, right? And so the first thing I said was like, this is fucked. And they were like, well, you know, we believe in what we do. I said, okay,
I also believe in what I do.
let's do this, right?
Let's find a middle place.
Let's say if there's a time tonight that a cocktail takes longer than 15 minutes, we're going to batch. And they go like, no problem. And it was like 6:30. And I'm like, we're at 20-minute ticket time, you know,
Right.
like, so we have to find a way, right? We're not putting juices in it because we don't want the juices to lose the
Life
pop.
does
or we don't
find a
want-
way.
We don't want anything to brown, you know, but like we need to become more efficient. And then
you need to respect the realities of the service environment you're in.
yeah. And like, I get it, you know, like
But that's exactly what fine dining allows you to do, is to understand where you're cutting those. Like, how can I cut corners without negatively impacting
quality.
a guest experience?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right. And living those realities.
Yeah. I think, you know, that was one of the things that like I saw as an immediate problem was just like people aren't happy. People are getting an appetizer before they get their drink. Like that's not the way that it
And there's a
should
number of different ways to solve that problem.
work. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's true. Yep.
But they're likely going to have other knock-on impacts, and they require a great deal of control from a service staff and their interface with the kitchen.
And a significant difference in training and extensive training versus fixing, you know, 5 bartenders method versus fixing
Right. So
30
one of the old realities at Saison was that the menu takes a certain amount of time to eat, but we don't ever want the guests to feel rushed or anything. But we need to make a turn, but we can't tell them there's a turn that's happening.
Yeah.
So we can't, but we need to get their menu started. It is non-negotiable. So checking with them to make sure that we're not going to kill them.
Yep.
And that there's nothing that they really, really don't want to eat.
Yeah.
And then we have to get their menu started.
Yep.
So in order to start the beverage experience, we would just pour everybody a glass of champagne. Now things are a little different these days, but back in the old times, that's how they solved that. And then you would have these very small moments to figure out whether or not they wanted a pairing. But because the guest doesn't know what's happening.
Yeah.
So you can use the lack of information that they have in that sort of situation to obscure things. But I would often have this conversation with my subordinates, and especially captains, right? At Angler and in other environments, it's like, just make the decision.
Yeah.
Right. If you give them
There's
like
no time for
$7.25 worth of champagne because that's the decision you made. I'm not going to argue with you.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's just not worth it. Right. Like, it is very easy for me to make $7.25 elsewhere to pay for the decision that you made.
Right.
Now, if you make that decision too many times in a row because you fucked something up or this, that, and the other thing, then we're going to need to have another decision. But I think there's a huge part of front of house management is setting people up with expectations and just them understanding that what they're here for is to create experiences. It's the Canlis brothers talk about this all the time. It's the rules of the game versus the spirit of the game. The rules of the game is that you will sit down at my restaurant and we will put food in front of you and you will maybe have a beverage of an alcoholic or non-alcoholic variety, right? Maybe you'll drink water. Those are the rules of the game.
Yeah.
The spirit of the game is we're here to take care of you and we're here to create experiences for you. And you're here not to just arrive at the trough and to scorf and like leave
And then get the fuck out. Yeah.
right. And then every once in a while you get a table who that's clearly what they want to do.
want.
And you're like, what? That's not worth arguing with them.
Yeah.
And it's really not like that. And that's like the next level of intelligence is understanding when you have that table and just fucking giving it to them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Give them what they want.
if they're going to be vacuum cleaners and eat everything in 4 bites and not understand any of the food, well, this is what one of my managers at Angler would say is, it's a quote from, I just watched the movie and I can't remember what it is. If people want to live in a donut, let them live in a donut.
God. That's
Right?
It sounds like an Office Space quote almost.
No, it's gonna come to me. I just watched the movie recently. It's like an 80s. Oh, it's Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh.
That's it. It's Beverly Hills Cop 2 because they were both on the thing because the new Eddie Murphy, the new version, which apparently is by all accounts not good, but
That's what I've heard.
But it's in the second Beverly Hills Cop, and he's riffing, and he's like, "If people want to live in a donut, let them live in a donut."
So funny.
So, because that's part of hospitality,
Yeah.
right? Is letting people have whatever experience they want to have, right? But then also not shitting on them if you can't give it to them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
To go back to our earlier conversation about Ron Bauer.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe it would be more useful to understand why that wine is so popular and then to figure out what can we offer that's inside of our quality rubrics that would also make them happy.
Yep.
Because you're a hospitality professional. You're not just someone who shoves wines in glasses.
If you have 4 steaks and none of them are a filet and somebody says, well, I usually like filet, what would you recommend? It's your job to know.
Well, they're idiots, but
you're not offering them, like.
When was the last time you had a filet mignon?
No, it's been forever. Yeah.
By hard choice.
No, yeah, I don't think. It's got to be at least a decade.
My girlfriend likes it, but there's been no complaints about just strip steak and hanger. She's the weirdest person on the planet because she was like, she loves hanger steak, but somehow also loves filet mignon, which I haven't still quite gotten to the bottom of that yet. But in any event,
I'm a ribeye guy. If I have a choice, I go ribeye. I love a New York strip though.
I'm strip though because the ribeyes are too big.
Yeah.
Right. If there's like 4 of us,
we portion everything out. We usually get it. We break it down into third pound or quarter pound.
Okay.
And then we vac bag them and everything like that.
So my father's a filet mignon guy. We can't get him out of it. But that's why the porterhouse is good for us because I can have the strip on the side. I do love it. But yeah, it's we're certainly living in a strange time for restaurants in general.
Yep.
The interest in the food world seems to be at an all-time high between the idolization of Bourdain, the Bear, the popularity of people like Gordon Ramsay,
the food influencers online.
There's plenty of evidence that ostensibly people are very interested in food, but the reality on the ground, at least in a place like San Francisco these days, and maybe less so in New York, although I've kind of heard mixed things from my friends who are still working back there, and certainly Chicago is doing all right as well. But I think this really speaks to at the underpinning of it. One of the issues is also just like the rents that are charged, right? And this is what nobody wants to talk about in the restaurant world is that you only have so many options if you're going to make money, right? You either got to increase prices.
Cut labor,
or make rent go down.
Yeah.
Right. Those are your options. Those are your controllable costs. Yeah. Right. And unfortunately, because of restaurateurs' solid access to capital, people who own restaurant spaces know that they have more people behind the people who are inside of their failing restaurant to put another failing restaurant inside of it. So it means that the real estate market for restaurant spaces is artificially inflated by restaurateurs' access to capital.
Yeah.
But we are kind of in this game of chicken between consumers, landlords, and restaurateurs, right? Which is to say, consumers don't want to pay anything else for food.
Yep.
Landlords don't want to lower their rental prices. I don't think Jose the dishwasher is the problem, right? Him making $17 an hour is something he should make $37 an hour, right? He's the most valuable person inside of the whole restaurant. And in 17 years of working in restaurants, I have literally never seen anybody who looks like me ever walk into a restaurant and ask for a dishwasher job.
Right.
So guys, they're not taking our jobs. Just putting it out there.
Exactly.
Right. It's just not.
And they're
going
to work 10 times harder than we would ever work anyways.
Precisely. And that's one of the things I really love about the restaurant business is that I am a cishet white dude from Seattle who lived in New York. One of my closest friends, colleagues, acquaintances at Angler is this guy named Eduardo, I call him the mayor of Angler because he's been there. He has so much institutional knowledge. He basically polishes all the glassware, all the flatware, all the silverware, because we work with this beautiful stuff. And there's got to be somebody who treats it well.
Right.
But without Eduardo, we don't have anything. He is literally probably outside of my colleagues on the wine team, my most trusted colleague.
Yeah.
Right. At Angler in 5 years of working there.
Yeah.
And I would have no occasion to get to know anyone like him ever, which is why I'm saying we should have this compulsory service inside of the restaurant business.
Yeah.
for that because, there's not a lot of occasions where we would rub shoulders, right? And I don't speak a lot of Spanish besides dirty kitchen Spanish, and he doesn't speak a lot of English besides, dirty kitchen English.
Yeah.
But, we figured out a way to communicate and really bridge the gap. And I treasured the things that I've learned from Eduardo, both as a person and, as a human over the years. And I feel so blessed to have had that experience, because if I had gone to work in corporate ad banking, I don't think that would have happened. Right. If there's a lot of different other lives I had, but I don't think there's any of the ones other than me becoming a sommelier where I get to meet somebody like Eduardo and see his work ethic and his incredible attention to detail and all of the small things, that decisions he makes in what is ostensibly a very humble position at the restaurant, which is absolutely essential towards us creating the experiences we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's a great equalizer, and that's one of the reasons that I love wine so much, is because I feel like wine allows us an opportunity to kind of you open a new wine, you start a new conversation with somebody, and it allows you an opportunity to, whether you good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think you still have water. Maybe I could get you.
I just got a little down the wrong tube. Eduardo did over the years drink some wine.
Good, thank God.
He really likes champagne.
It'd be robbery if he didn't.
No. We had to make sure he was well taken care of.
That's so funny. But yeah, I think it's a great way to kind of normalize and equalize people and allow people an opportunity to. I've always thought when you pull a cork from a bottle, it allows you to start a new conversation. Right. You talk about this wine. I agree. I like it. You don't like it. Okay, let's open another one. And then you like this one. I don't like this one.
I can drink a bottle of wine on my own, but I'd rather drink two with you.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, 100%.
That's 100%. Long been my line.
So, well, we're getting to the point. I'll ask you a couple kind of wrap up questions, sure, I guess. And you've kind of touched on this a bit. And I
it's just good, whatever it is. I can't really tell whether it's Chenin or Jura, but it's one of the two.
It's not blindable. So
okay.
I always say that the wine doesn't have to be blindable. It can be blindable. In this case, it's not a blindable one. So we'll leave it as it is. And we'll reveal.
It's tasty though.
We'll reveal
like
in
it.
a second. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've kind of danced around this subject a bit, and I think that hospitality is an incredibly complex thing to kind of put into a nutshell. But if you had to, in a couple sentences, tell us, me, and however many listeners there are, what hospitality means to you. Do you think you could distill that for us?
Yeah, this took a long time to learn. So, I mean, what hospitality is it is literally taking care of people when it is not convenient to do so. Mm. People you don't know, people have weird tastes, people have weird preferences, it is making space for them in what is in some ways inconvenient for you. Mm. Right. But that's at its highest expression. That's really what hospitality is making sure that your guest feels comfortable regardless of the level of discomfort it may cause you. Mm-hmm. Or just taking yourself out of the scenario. It's removing the I or the me and making the focus of things the other, the you, right? And I think understanding where people come from is the start of that, right? Or maybe you don't even have to understand. You just have to make sure they're having a great fucking time, because your job is to make sure that when they leave your restaurant that they feel like puppies and flowers and rainbows, and that conclusion will be reached at dynamically. Yeah. Right. As you have conversations with them, they understand what their preferences. And I guess that's the blessing of ultra fine dining, is that you have time to figure those things out.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. You have longer.
You have a way to build a relationship because you have 3.5 hours to do it.
Yep.
But I've seen just as much kindness and hospitality in taco shops on Mission as I have, in the palaces of fine dining in Europe and New York.
Yeah.
Right. The principle is the same in either direction. Mm. It is simply thinking of other people and thinking about how to make their lives better in a scenario where it is not convenient for you to do so necessarily. Because I love taking care of my regulars, but I wouldn't say that there's a real test of my hospitality skills in many ways.
Yeah. I've always loved when somebody comes in and they're in a shitty attitude when they get there, and then I'm able to kind of like be part of the reason why they're able to relax and unwind and enjoy. James Lynn, who was our director of operation at Ozumo, passed away, unfortunately, during the pandemic, complications of COVID. And he would always say, this is a mini vacation. When people come through this door, you should do everything you can to help them leave their problems, check out for a little while, relax, and just enjoy themselves, right? Like, they don't have time and they don't have the ability to take a vacation and go somewhere else and relax. So this is a micro vacation for them, and it's your responsibility to make sure that they have a good time.
And you have to meet them where they are.
Yeah, right.
There's no two ways about that.
Yeah.
They're coming to your house, but you can't just stick them in a lane and make them go, right? You have to think about what's happening, read the table. I mean, again, this is all the luxuries that fine dining gives you, is the ability and the time and the wherewithal and the resources to like make those decisions. And if there is any defensible side of fine dining as not just something for the very shishi and the rich, it's simply that, is that I hold far more space for the person, you know, the young couple who's clearly out for the fanciest meal that they've had of their entire lives, and they don't know where any of the silverware goes or any of that stuff. Right. There's far more joy in that to me than the, you know, very wealthy Pack Heights Upper East Side couple who this is clearly the 17th meal that they've had like this year. And they don't necessarily even like dining like this, but like they're just both of them deserve my attention and my space, but I feel much more morally obligated to the person who just spent one 1/100th of their household income for the year on this meal than the person who spent 0.00001% of their income for the whole year. And I guess for me, that's what hospitality is about, is just taking care of people when it isn't necessarily convenient to take care of them.
That's perfect. It's
not my definition. It's one that I've gleaned from, mentors over the years, but that's really at the heart of it. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And then the next part is going to be kind of an experimental part, because I haven't done this before, but I wanted to see if there's a way that you could suggest maybe to the listeners, given that your success throughout the Court of Master Sommeliers.
Sure.
Is there a tip or a piece of advice that you'd like to offer for people that are hoping to pursue a career in wine certifications in general? Is there something that you would say is maybe like your North Star? Is there something that's helped?
Well, the cake and frosting thing is 100% true.
Yeah, right.
So
I like that.
You got to do it for yourself, right? At the end of the day, it's not, you have to enjoy the process of it. And for me, it really became about the community. But at the end of the day, for any of the certifications or anything like that, it's not about, getting an MW or an MS behind your name. It's about becoming the sort of person who can pass the exam. It's not about passing the exam. If you get too wrapped up and invest too much in becoming, putting on a new lapel pin or getting a new post-nominal, that's the real dead end of it. It's more about transforming yourself into the sort of human who has the abilities and the perspective and the energy and the intensity and the wherewithal to pass the exam. Right. And I think there's plenty of people who I would think of as mentors who don't necessarily have a pin right now because of bureaucratic nonsense, right? I'm thinking about people like Yannick Benjamin, who sat the exam, 9, 10, 11 times and passed. He might have passed every section twice. He just didn't pass it in the right window. Yeah. And that's an administrative gripe that I have, with the court personally. I don't understand why did the candidate sections reset if our sections never reset? Yeah. But That's a bigger, I don't speak as a representative of the court when I say that.
Yeah.
But when I think about someone like Yannick, I think of the sort of person who I would like to be, and for so many reasons other than any of the wine stuff. But stop focusing on the result and start focusing on the growth, because that's really what's going to get you where you want to be. And then and you miss 100% of shots you don't take. Mm-hmm. And if you don't show up, you don't get to go to the show.
Yeah.
Right? That's just it.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people who are like, I want to be in the wine world, but then don't want to go to tasting group at 8:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying that's the only way you can do it, but you can't just step into this world and be like, well, I'm great. Right. And give me things.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
That's just not how the world works.
Yeah.
You've got to show up. You've got to create space for yourself, for other people, and really build a sense of community. And just because you pass something doesn't mean, I have a great example of that. Like I passed the exam. I maybe focused too much on my frosting and not enough on my cake in some ways. Mm-hmm. So, which is to say that I don't have some sort of tawny corporate job where I make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, nor am I ever likely to, but that was also not ever terribly important to me.
Yeah. Right.
What was important to me is that I honored the space that was created for me by becoming the sort of person who could pass the exam. And it was important for me to pass it because it was a goal I had set for myself. Mm-hmm. But unless you define success on your own terms, you're always going to be chasing this dragon and investing in someone else's idea of success rather than your own idea of success. And of course, that means you're going to set yourself up for a disappointment, right?
Yeah. Kind of the intrinsic, extrinsic motivation.
And the more you can divorce yourself from the fact that your intrinsic personal value is attached to the value of how you do on an exam, the easier it's going to be to pass an exam.
Yeah.
Just telling you that right now.
That's funny. Okay. And then, so you're enjoying the wine. Mm-hmm. This is a wine we struggled to pick a wine. We kept kicking ourselves. We have an off-site storage facility.
It's delicious.
We are really happy that we opened this wine because we had never tasted it before, and we knew that it was supposed to be great. And I tasted it when Bianca was out picking up our blind from our tasting earlier, and I just text her and I go, "This wine fucking rocks." I was like, "Oh, should we open it? Should we not open it? Like, are we gonna get another bottle? Like, I don't know."
Is it Valentini?
No.
Okay,
this is
too much. Oh, sick.
Pate, the Chardonnay Rose.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I can't recall having had it from 11.
Oh no,
sorry, 21.
Yeah.
Yeah, I it's been a while since I've had Patai's aligotés are often I love red Patai. I love red Patai so much. I think it's one of the last sort of bastions of values in Redberg.
Yeah.
But the whites have often been a little too oxidative for me personally.
Sure.
A little leaden and heavy, but this is fascinating because I don't think I've ever had this bottling of it. I'm sure, Paul or Peter Wasserman was here. They could tell us all about the red Chardonnay.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it has to do with the pedicules. I think the actual, I don't think it's not the berries themselves that are red. It's the stems. So
stems, right.
But I'm not sure it's the same as they have what's called Melanca Rouge in Jura. But there's a red stemmed variation of Chardonnay.
Make it more confusing.
Because you're right. I don't know enough about it to speak about it authoritatively.
Sure.
But I do know that in most of the whites he makes are aligotés besides this. And it's a fascinating mixture of reduction, oxidation,
tension.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of acidity too, which I've loved about the 21s.
Yeah.
As a lover of acid-filled or white Burgundy, it's been
vintage.
18, 19, 20 have been a hard series of vintages to drink. But that's really delightful. Thank you for opening it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we were excited to share it, and we wanted to try to find something that was a little more niche. We were between this and there was a couple old Rieslings bouncing around, and there was, I was looking at we have this. We just picked up Louis Chebra from Portugal.
Okay.
And there's this
they're delightful.
The 100% Caño bottling Mono C.
Okay.
And I go like, maybe I should open this, and like we just for like an hour.
The Sebra wines, the best Sebra.
Like, what do we open for Morgan? What do we open for Morgan?
No, the best Sebra wines are the white wines are.
Yeah.
I say this as I'm more of a white wine human than I'm a red wine human.
Yeah. I've only had the Ilimitado Bronco and the Ilimitado Tinto, and both are great. And
there's some incredible white wine coming out of Portugal right now. If you ever get a chance to try it, the Newport Coche, which is it's named after Jean-François Coche of Cocherie.
Okay, great, yeah.
But Martins has it, and it is bonkers.
Really?
Yeah, it's just like there's not a lot of wines that get me hot and bothered these days that I can also afford.
Yeah. That's a good point.
That's definitely one of them. I mean, you got to find it. It's about 70 or 80 wholesale. I think we had it on the list at 180, 190 at Angler. But that's great. The beautiful thing about working at Angler was that white wine under 225 that you could never sell to anybody is absolutely 100, because you get these people who come in like, well, I want Chasson Montrachet, but it sure is expensive these days. What do you have? So like you could sell, Old Vine Chenin from South Africa and really fancy white wine from Portugal and all that stuff.
I love that.
So,
that's great.
Yeah. For sure.
To tie back into your idea of kind of like understanding how to kind of lateral into other things, right?
Yeah, because it's about how do you get the wine in the glass, right? That's fundamentally the question. You can force it on people, but that's not a very good hospitality scenario. Nope. So tricking them into it, it's better. But basically, you don't scalp them around it, but you just say that, like, hey, if you want to go on an adventure tonight, I think this wine offers tremendous quality. You've never heard it before. And then the line I would always use on the floor, because I think this is really what people fear, is that they're not going to get something they like.
Right.
And so I would always say on the floor, and if you don't like it, I'm going to drink it.
Yeah.
Right. That was my line for a long time. And I almost never wound up drinking the wines that I would recommend.
Yeah.
Right. Like maybe one time in 50, one time in 100.
Yeah.
Would I wind up actually taking a bottle back because I'd missed the mark.
Yeah.
Because if you do your homework right, then you're going to be able to get to a bottle that's an adjacency that they're going to be happy with.
Yeah. That's a great point.
And I guess the beauty of something like the CMS is that you've tasted all the wines that they've had. So instead of asking them, well, what do you want to drink tonight? You ask them, well, what do you generally drink?
Yeah.
And then you can get a vibe because you've had California Chardonnay. I've had California Chardonnay, right? Or you've had Northern Rhone Syrah, and I've had Northern Rhone Syrah. So then you ask them, well, you want to do something close to home, or do you want to go on an adventure?
Yeah.
I think this becomes extra important if you're in like an Italian restaurant or something like that, where it's Italian restaurants that don't work with all Italian wines. I don't understand it entirely. You've got 1,000 indigenous grape varieties. You should be able to like kind of cover your bases there.
Absurd. And not to mention all of the
outside of champagne.
Varieties.
I mean, like Giampaolo Paterlini does a great job of it at Acquarello.
Program's pretty sick, yeah.
Right. You should have him on the show if you can.
We're working on it. Yeah.
He's a great human. So
there's this unfortunate bottleneck that's happening, with our time with consulting the 9 to 5, the 1.5-year-old,
right,
and then doing this,
and then other people who also have children.
Yeah, also, yeah. Right. Speaking of Giampaolo, yeah, and then additionally, we're lucky to have gotten a couple great winemakers on, but we only catch a lot of people when they come into the city,
right.
And so kind of sourcing people from outside of San Francisco is also a little bit just a slower process. It just takes a lot more planning. So
right. We at here at this time at this place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not like right off the highway. You know what I mean? We're close, but
yes, Santa Cruz winemakers are going to be fine.
Yeah. yeah, exactly.
Just get them up from up south, right?
Yeah. That's the trek. Well, I guess any closing words or any
No, I hope we all drink more wine and drink better wine before the world ends, whenever that's going to be. Hopefully it won't be this century, but I'm going to hang around to find out.
Yeah, I just hope my daughter doesn't have to deal with it. Yeah, exactly. Okay, Morgan.
Yep. Cheers.
Cheers.
Great
Thank you.
to be here.
Appreciate you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.